fresh off his Joe Rogan appearance, where Joe Rogan had not seen his documentary and didn't seem to care at all about anything he had to say about Miami, seemed to have drifted off during that portion. Billy Corben.
I don't think that's true. I think he's very interested in what's going on down here, the Florida fuckery of it all.
It didn't sound like he was terribly interested, and it didn't sound like he had seen very much of your documentary. But regardless, what was the reaction to your anti-vaxxing or anti-vaxxers?
Joe's chill. Ivermectin has a calming effect, I think. No, I mean, listen, I like Joe a lot. I think he's really smart, really funny. And listen, you can say what you want to say about who he has on the show. He had this idiot on the show. There's a diversity of viewpoints. He could build an echo chamber if he wanted to, and he hasn't. He's built his own thing, and it's his house, and he can put on whoever he wants to put on. I appreciate him, giving me an opportunity. And no, I think he's very interested in Miami, and he's very interested in how relevant and crazy it is, and how that craziness is exported to the rest of the country. I think he's a sharp guy, and he knows that like there are trends, and there is fuckery and culture and activity and crime that is born here, or at least perfected here, and then spreads throughout the country and the world. And so I will say that he has other podcasters I know, a very rabid fan base. And so they are predominantly not confident in the vaccine and highly skeptical of the government. Understandable skepticism. I'm, as I told Joe, I'm a documentary filmmaker, so by my nature, I'm a natural born skeptic. But at the same time, in a way, not to overstate it, we are, cultural anthropologists. There's a certain science to what we do, and we apply the scientific method in producing a documentary. You make observations, you ask questions, maybe you have a hypothesis, and then you collect data and you experiment, you challenge that data, and then you draw some conclusions. And so, journalism or documentary filmmaking is a lot like science in that you base your conclusions on the best data you have available at the time. I mean, gravity is just a theory, but it's the best theory we have right now. I guess the alternative being the angels and demons hold our feet to the ground. I mean, so you have to, that's what science is. And so really, I think the toughest thing for me, not the toughest thing, but like the most annoying thing for me is like the idea that I have like some big pharma agenda. My agenda was very straightforward. Joe had asked, isn't Florida doing great in the pandemic? And I'm like, August was the deadliest month of the pandemic. 1 in 5 and as many as 1 in 4 deaths in the United States of COVID or from COVID happened in the state of Florida. I don't think that that's particularly good in light of the fact that it's worse now, despite the fact that we have this vaccine, which is available. I use the term free. I meant no out-of-pocket expense. Obviously, the government is paying for it, and somebody has to pay for it. But it's available. I mean, there are countries right now where the vaccine's not available, where people are dying in the fucking street waiting for health care that also isn't available to them. My agenda is very simple. It's if maybe we can share more information from more reliable sources to more people, maybe fewer people will die who don't have to die. Maybe the 27-year-old police officer, she left behind a young husband who's also an officer and a 2-year-old daughter. Maybe that 2-year-old daughter would have a mother. The 4-year-old girl in Texas, whose mother was a rabid anti-vaxxer who gave her daughter COVID, who then died overnight in her bed within 5 hours of exhibiting fever. Maybe that 4-year-old girl is alive. And the mother herself said, I wish I had gotten vaccinated, because there's a doctor who's consulting with schools here in Miami-Dade County who said the best way to protect our children is to surround them and insulate them with vaccinated people. And I understand there's people who disagree with that, but my agenda, I don't have any stock in Pfizer. I don't have any stock in Merck for that matter, who produces ivermectin. It's big pharma produces all this shit. So there's no agenda here other than to maybe just offer an alternative perspective to what people are hearing.
Do you even understand why what you're saying is viewed by anyone as controversial? Do you understand when you say whatever it is based in science and fact, whatever you say on Joe Rogan, do you understand why it's being received with hostility?
I understand, but it's no less frustrating because again, we can disagree, but the hostility is surreal because, like, again, the agenda is to try to better inform people and to save lives. People are upset that I said that at this point it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated, and thus a pandemic of the misinformed and uninformed. And the really funny thing about it is that there are people who might ideologically disagree with me politically, and those are the people who are actually who are dying. And I don't want to see them dead just because we disagree ideologically or politically. I'd like to see people who are otherwise healthy. I understand there's pre-existing conditions and comorbidities, but people who are otherwise healthy, who would be alive maybe for decades longer, if not for this virus. And there are ways to at least slow the spread. But the reality is that, unvaccinated people are increasing the spread, are fueling the variants, which are thus making the original vaccine less effective for everybody. So it does make, that's the thing too, is that it's not just my body, my choice. This is about community health. This is about public health, I should say. Your personal decisions in this do affect the health of other people. And not only does it affect the health of other people in terms of spreading COVID, but also just the ancillary effects, like the ICU beds. If you get into a car accident and you need help, or you get sick, or you have a heart attack, or there's these horror stories about, one guy being passed from, ICU to ICU who had a heart attack between 3 states and winds up dying because he got turned away by like dozens of ICUs. That guy shouldn't have to die because he couldn't get medical care because the ICU beds are filled with COVID patients. If there's a way to stem that tide, and I believe that there is a way to stem that tide. And people say to me, don't argue with anti-vaxxers, just wait. That's the meme. That's like the joke. But it's not funny, because, and again, people who feel like they're on my side of the aisle, so to speak, because nobody knows what my politics are. They think they know. I'm a libtard. I'm a this and that. But, I'm much more moderate and much more diverse in my opinions than people understand. But the bottom line is that people saying to me, oh, they're in red states, fuck them. And I'm like, I live in a red state. Don't fuck them. I don't want Floridians to die. I don't want my friends and neighbors to die just because I may disagree with, not like who they vote for.
You must be fascinated by what's going on in the Republican Party. And for the record, let's just tell people, because people are always going to see you as left-leaning. The last 7 or 8 elections that have been voted on for president, you've been pretty much split down the middle, right?
And not even. I mean, I'm a super voter. I turned 18 in 1996, the summer of 96, which was a presidential election year. And I was chomping at the bit. I registered to vote that summer, like in advance, and I was just like, so I'd get my voter registration card in the mail so I could participate in my democracy immediately. And I did. And I vote in everything. I vote in local elections. If it's a one-off, referendum, I go out and I vote. I exercise. I think that's, that's what's the slogan in Florida: vote early and often. That's what we do here. And I go right to my Navarro pharmacy and talk to the bolletero and fill out. Well, I let them fill out my absentee ballot. I just sign it at the bottom, and then some dead guy witnesses it, and we Magatov. So, but the 7 elections. So it's been 7 presidential elections since I turned 18 that I voted in, and I have voted for 3 Democrats. I voted for Democrats 3 times across those 7 presidential elections.
I just want people to know that, and that's okay. You can take up your issues, whatever they are, but I am so very weary of the fistfights that start just because people have their allegiances and then confirmation bias starts and people stop listening. So we'll give that to the people as information, but you and I had a conversation off air that I'd like to have on air, which is how fascinating it is to watch what's happening as a shrinking demo becomes more and more extreme. And in that extremity, they're killing their own shrinking demo because you've got so much of the far right not wanting anything to do with vaccines, thus hurting their power structure that they're clinging to at every turn because they're killing their voters.
Listen, the only thing worse than a 2-party system is a 1-party system, which is basically what it's come down to. And ideologically, I think a significant percentage of Americans fall into a more 3rd party. We don't feel that either party kind of effectively represents what we believe in. But the reality is that there are 2 power parties, right? There's only 2 major parties. And one of them has basically, there are the dinosaurs cursing the meteor as it hurtles toward the earth. The Republican Party demographically is shrinking. I think the recent census shows that. You know, the tanning of America, the browning of America, greater diversity in this country means certain doom for
the killing of the base.
Yeah, for the Republicans in the long run. And so what unfortunately has happened is while Democrats grow larger and more diverse, the Republicans have a shrinking base and need to kowtow and pander to that base. So what does that mean? That means Christian nationalists, white supremacists. That means I don't like extremists of the left. I don't like fanatics of the right. Okay, but there's only one party. This is a point I started to make on Joe that I didn't land because we got distracted. But there are left-wing people in the Democratic Party. None of them are in control. None of them are in power. They might have a big soapbox or a lot of Twitter followers, but AOC doesn't write legislation, and Bernie Sanders isn't a leader of the party, and neither is Elizabeth Warren. Whether you agree or disagree with them, they're not in control. Who do the Democrats nominate for their as their candidates? Centrists, moderates. In fact, I would argue right of center candidates like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. Sanity prevails. I think candidates who, by and large, ideologically, and in terms of their experience, in terms of their ideology, actually appeal to more Americans. The Republicans, though, you don't see crazy people speaking at the Democratic National Convention. The Republicans are just steering to the right because they can't lose that base. They can't lose that base of angry people, of racist people, of people who want to build a theocracy in place of a democracy. And it's unfortunate because I voted Republican in the past, and to see what's happening to that party just to cling to power. And their only hope now, other than pandering to the extremists and fanatics, their only hope is fewer people voting, is a disenfranchisement. That's their you think, in a democracy, you want more people to participate in your democracy. I want that too. I don't care what your party is. I want more people to have access to vote. If you're an American and you want to participate in your democracy, you should be able to do that. Republicans feel the exact opposite way from that because the numbers are not on their side. So gerrymandering, voter suppression laws, that's all they have. They basically have to cheat in order to win an election. And most importantly, and this is what's so damaging also in the anti-vaxxer debate, is misinformation, spreading misinformation and sowing doubt in our institutions, and people saying like, well, you can't trust anything the government says. Hang on. Anything? Like nothing at all? People can have good policy, bad policy, good opinions, bad opinions. Some of my opinions are good. Some of my opinions from 5 years ago, I probably disagree with now. That's science. That's life. You grow, you live, you learn, you get more information, and you change your mind about things. But that's the scary thing, is that the idea is that they sow mistrust and then they sell mistrust, and then they rely on that mistrust to say, well, you can't, the elections, you trust the government to run you trust the government to run a vaccine program. Oh, you trust the government to do, and they're like, well, a lot of people have doubt about the election. It's like, no, people actually don't. Just crazy people do. There's no evidence that anything was amiss. There's no evidence that there's any kind of abuse or fuckery involved in the FDA's approval of the vaccine. There's no evidence that there was any fuckery in the election last year. Actually, there was fuckery in the election. There was fraud in Florida, perpetuated by the Republicans. Frank Artilles got arrested for it. A former Republican state senator got arrested for fraud because the Republicans have been running, and this is an old school Florida scheme of theirs. They run shill candidates who they pay to siphon votes away from the Democrat. And they win sometimes with that tactic. And now 2 people have been arrested for that in just the last year.
It's been this craven before, but it's never been this obvious and overt to us, correct? Like this is something that has been shadowy power grabbing for a while, but never quite as obvious as, well, if our base dies, I know what we'll do. We'll just get others. Our idea of equality is get others to not be able to vote. It's never been that craven.
Well, we had Jim Crow laws, we had poll taxes, we had, reading tests and all. So we had some crazy racist shit in this country. Let's be perfectly honest about it. And I mean, we were pretty overt about our desire to not let women vote, to not let people of color vote, to not let immigrants, or minorities vote. I mean, I think, that has been law in this country, overtly and despicably and racistly, if that's a word. But so I think it has been as overt. I don't think it's been so desperate, meaning that one of our two major parties of power in this country is hanging on demographically by a thread, and they need to do everything they can to stay relevant and stay in power when demographics are just not on their side. And that desperation is fueling some crazy shit.
I want to ask Mike Ryan a question, but give the audience that isn't familiar with this story how it is that the Cuban mafia made an appearance in your life this week.
Not in my life. I mean, in Miami life, the newish, I think he's been in the job about 5 months, City of Miami police chief, Art Acevedo, who came here from Houston, a high-profile figure, has a big social media following, somewhat controversial in the way that I think all police chiefs can be controversial. He Cuban-American, but came up in the Los Angeles area. I believe he's from California. So not kind of steeped in the Miami Cuban exile experience per se, but has that in his family, has the persecution and has, political prisoners, has Bay of Pigs veterans in his family. Last month during a morning roll call in front of about 100 police officers, he made we'll call it a crack, because he said it was somewhat in jest, but I guess there's always truth in sarcasm, right? He makes a remark. And the context is important, but I'll tell you the remark first before the context. He makes a remark that the Miami Police Department is run by the, quote, Cuban mafia, end quote, and with kind of a chuckle. And I think there was an uncomfortable kind of murmur in the room. The context, though, which I think is important, is that what he was referring to is that in a minority-majority community, like Miami is, where not only is the majority of the population Cuban-American, but the majority of people in power, of elected officials, of bureaucrats, of leaders in this community, in the public and private sector, are Cuban-American. And what he was saying is that we have an obligation as minority-majority leaders to create a more diverse community and police force. The joke was in the context of we need more diversity in our ranks. We need more diversity in all areas of the police department. And so, because the, quote, Cuban mafia, end quote, runs the department. That was the context of the remark.
Okay, but beyond that,
yes,
he had to apologize for
yes, he had to immediately, apologize. He had the 1080 by 1080 square on social media with the Miami Police Department logo and the full statement, to apologize for it. He was forced to apologize for it by the city commission, by the demagogues in the city commission,
by the Cuban mafia, the Cuban Mike, had you heard of the Cuban mafia
Keep
before?
Me out of this
it's
one.
It's all the but it's
man,
not.
Don't drag me in on this one.
It's the politicians.
No.
It's Carollo. It's all these guys are the Cuban mafia, and so the law enforcement has to apologize to the Cuban mafia, and the Cuban mafia is blustery guys in suits who have the power through all the corruption that this city has given them power in.
I agree. The Cuban mafia is not a real thing. It's just a nickname we associate with political families of great lineage.
Ay, Dios mío. I'm a part of the Cuban mafia. I think is what I am. Listen, I think the problem is that, well, I'm sorry. The exception that they took to it, to be fair, is that this was a derogatory term, a slur that Fidel Castro had exploited to refer to the Cuban exiles who had fled, the anti-communists who fled the island. I don't know. I'm not familiar necessarily with that derivation. I do know there was a real the corporation. T.J. English wrote a great book about it, about Jose Miguel Battle, who was El Padrino, who was the godfather of what was known as the Cuban, the corporation, a.k.a. the, quote, Cuban mafia, end quote. And so there was actually a real, organized crime within some of the, he was a Bay of Pigs, a former police officer in Cuba, Bay of Pigs veteran who went into the numbers racket, basically, just like a lot of, kind of gangsters in American stories like that. I think what's particularly amusing, for lack of a better term, there's a better term, I'm not going to say it, but amusing is to see the likes of Commissioner Coma Mierda, Commissioner Joe Carollo, get his panties in a bind about this when he is a notorious, corrupt, racist, wife beater, and anti-Semite. This is a guy who has no shame or compunction talking shit about Jews, talking shit about African Americans. This guy campaigned for George fucking Wallace for president, okay, back in the 70s. A segregationist. I don't say that like I'm labeling, oh, Billy, you call everybody racist. No, this guy ran as a segregationist. Segregation was his platform and got elected 3 times, or should I say 3 times? This was his famous signal, hand signal, George Wallace, 3 times as governor of Alabama, and ran for president 3 times on the platform of segregation. He was a Democrat, by the way, and Joe Carollo supported him and campaigned for him in Miami. He also was briefly a Metro-Dade police officer and was forced to resign before he could be fired. You know what it takes to be fired from the Metro-Dade Police Department, especially back in the 70s and 80s? He had photocopied a KKK parody ad out of like a National Lampoon magazine, photocopied it on like the police department photocopy machine, and slid it in the mailboxes of black police officers as a joke. So which joke is funnier? The Art Acevedo's Cuban Mafia gag, or Joe Carollo, who was forced to resign from the police department for putting a KKK parody ad into black police officers' mailboxes?
I was not joking when I said, when you say Cuban Mafia, and I don't know how many people listening to this, I assume that you associate mafias with many ethnicities. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Cuban Mafia, but when I think of the Cuban Mafia,
nope,
I think of blustery politicians who are corrupt and just make a lot of noise, and they're the power, and they do all sorts of awful things. I don't actually think of it as a rough you up mafia. I think of it as a power mafia that uses that power to do like the things that you're talking about here.
There are political crime families and dynasties. They're not all Cuban in this community.
We've got all kinds in this community.
So please don't name them. You don't have to. You can just let that be.
Is Papi a capo, or where does he fall in the hierarchy?
My father would be the physical type of an old retired Cuban Mafia bluster, but not actually anyone capable of violence. Yeah. Just someone loud, makes a lot of noise, shakes his hands at you, and isn't really actually like powerful.
Like a Ventanita cowboy. Ventanita Cowboys,
While running the South Florida chapter of the Latin Kings.
What did you know about the Cuban Mafia before the first time that you heard that expression? I'm telling you, it's not something that it was in my childhood. It's something that I specifically associate with all of the corruption in this city. We've got how many different guys, not just from this city, Billy, but how many Florida men are going to be running for power in this state?
Jesus. Yeah, I was thinking about doing a documentary about this called Florida Men, plural, because I don't think there's another state in the union, probably in history, that has ever had this many potential contenders, like people who have actually said or intimated or told confidants, or even have even in the past expressed interest in running in the Republican primary. You have obviously Donald Trump, you have Marco Rubio, you have Rick Scott, you have Ron DeSantis, you have Matt Gaetz, who actually mentioned that he might run. I feel like I'm definitely forgetting. Oh, Francis Suarez, Mayor Postalita from city of Miami, has said that he hasn't excluded the possibility.
Ruled it out. He has not yet ruled it out.
And finally, for those of us who want a president who's going to bomb Cuba, we finally have our candidate. We have our man. We have our man from the Pomade Brigade.
Think about those 6 dudes, though.
I will say, Billy does discount Suarez a lot on social media. We all discounted the last president from that party. We were all laughing. We were all making fun of him. Suarez has been making really good
Rubio
political
on
connections.
the right track before drinking water awkwardly?
Well, before he got bullied by Donald Trump and didn't really know how to handle it. And Suarez knows how to play the game. He's tight with the MAGAs, but he also knows how to play the crypto game and get a lot of businesses in here, which also might be a derivative of being tight with the MAGAs. But I wouldn't just laugh anybody out. It's very clear after the last 5 years of our lives, there is no candidate, including Gates, that would be too ridiculous because they all have to placate to an absurd base.
I don't disagree that we could see, future demagogues and people who will pander to the worst among us to gain power. The problem is that Trump is a extraordinarily unique character. I'm not saying he's an anomaly, but he is very unique in his ability to. I mean, this was a guy who was promoted as a character, as a TV character. A fictitious character, basically like the Monopoly Man. He was invented on that TV show, literally invented. Not a savvy businessman, not a straight shooter, not a guy looking out for the common man by any stretch of the imagination. He's the antithesis of all these things, but yet was able to come in with good old-fashioned bluster, racism, and populism and demagoguery, and was able to pull off a national election once. But
and the superpower of being able to just totally bypass the final marker in checks and balances, which is shamelessness.
Yes.
Because
ain't no shame in this game.
Yeah, because there were certain things, even in the time of Nixon, that were just governed by overall shame. And he could just power through that stuff.
Norms.
To the point that,
norms,
to the point that an entire party was taking its lead, like, oh, this is okay now? And you even saw with Cuomo where Democrats were starting to take a page out of that book. You realize, as icky as it makes you feel, that's a way to maintain power. Just, we don't actually have to do anything about this? Like, whoa! This is amazing.
But look at Cuomo and look at Al Franken, and look at, I mean, Democrats have the decency to resign. They have some
and
fucking
gonna
shame left.
Look back at what Franken resigned over. I bet you if the party could have a do-over, they're like, maybe we don't have to bend at the very first sign of controversy, because they're not doing that on the other side of the aisle.
And you are right. Those 6 candidates that I mentioned as potential Republican candidates in the 2024 presidential election on the primary, they're fucking shameless. There's every single one to a man is shameless. I often say about Francis Suarez, I'd say shame on you, but you have none. So what am I going to waste my Twitter characters for?
How much different is Florida if two things go mildly different, two things that were very close to going mildly different, not just Florida, but the globe? If Al Gore wins Florida and if Gillum wins Florida.
Oh, fuck. Yeah. I mean, we are not sitting here. That's like some butterfly effect shit. Like, that's like that changes sort of the course of this country and the world and humanity in a significant way. Al Gore winning the 2000 election, which many would argue he did win the 2000 election, but a heist kind of accomplished by the Republicans here. The Republicans who, incidentally, the brother of the Republican candidate was the governor of the state, who helped control the Secretary of State and control the election apparatus in the state of Florida, along with a Supreme Court in which his father, the father of the candidate, the first George Bush the first, George H.W. Bush, had actually appointed justices to said court. That this was just sort of the perfect kind of conspiracy of convenience where all the players were already in place. That is the long con and the long game that these Republicans play, and they are so good at it. And that is the message. The message is that, while the Democrats are trying to figure out how to do the right thing, the Republicans are figuring out how to win. Okay, and so and I don't know, I don't know about you. You've seen some fights, and I will tell you, if the other guy's got you on the floor, has got one foot on your neck and the other foot is kicking you repeatedly in the stomach, and you're down there waving around the Constitution going, but, you're going to lose that debate. And this was a street fight for the presidency of the United States. That's what Roger Stone actually told me. Pre-pardon Roger Stone. Pre-trial, pre-pardon Roger Stone told me in 537 Votes, the documentary we did for HBO, that this was a street fight for the presidency of the United States, and the Democrats were just totally outgunned. But if you have a President Al Gore inaugurated in January of 2001, you have a proactive a proactive policy on climate change and sea level rise. So maybe you have a different and safer Miami and Florida today. Somebody argued, Mitchell Berger, a longtime friend of the Vice President Al Gore and one of his attorneys in Florida during the recount in the 2000 election, he believes, this might be a bit of an extreme theory, but he posits that 9/11, the attacks on 9/11 would not have occurred because Al Gore, even as vice president, was so vigilant about the daily intel briefings. He goes, he read them every day as vice president. He goes, I can only imagine he'd read them twice and have a million questions for the intelligence community about them as president. You know, and we wouldn't have had someone asleep at the wheel as George W. Bush was. Where was he? In Sarasota, I think, reading a children's book to a preschool class or an elementary school up there while this was happening. And most of his time spent in Camp David or in his vacation home in Texas. But I think you have a very, very different world. I don't think you have, at the very least, you don't have a war in Iraq. You may have a much more limited engagement in Afghanistan, meaning we would not have gone in there without an exit strategy and spent 2 decades. I mean, you had grandchildren going to fight in a war that their grandfathers had fought in. You had trillions of dollars. Whenever anybody says to us, oh, we have no money to pay for college for everybody, we have no money for universal health care or Medicare for all, I go, we just spent $2 trillion in Afghanistan. What's the ROI there? Who won that war? Well, the private contractors and the Taliban won that war. Like, that's what we invested $2 trillion of our tax money in. It's insane. It wouldn't have happened without President Al Gore.
And Gillum?
Yeah, I mean, as I sit here today, Andrew Gillum unconscious on the floor of a hotel room covered in his own blood and urine would be a better governor than Ron DeSantis. I mean, unlike governor, you okay? Listen, what do you want to do, governor? Better governor than Ron DeSantis. And I don't think that Andrew Gillum was the person that those of us who supported him at the time thought that he was. And I'm not referring to his. I mean, if he had been out of the closet and he had said, I'm a bi man or I am a gay man, I still would have supported him just the same. I just don't think he was an honest actor. I mean, you know, I think there is some wisdom in people who say we might have dodged a bullet with Andrew Gillum because this would have been a guy living a lie in the office, in the governor's mansion. But there's an interesting theory. So I don't have a lot of interest in the personal lives of politicians. I get a lot of chisme. I get a lot of this guy, that guy, you know, like a lot of stories in this town, you know, there's a million stories in this town. And a lot of people like to talk shit.
Is your other documentary public yet? The one where a career or sort of a political career? Okay, yeah. So I'll keep that
next
moving.
time.
All right. It's a good one.
Year.
People will like.
Got Leaky Faucet.
People, no, that's why I asked the question. Continue, please.
Yeah. Mike's like, don't make me edit this.
I'll edit it. All right. Give me a clean pickup, Dan.
Yeah. I don't know where I was. I'm
sorry. Well, you cut off his train of thought. So just, do you remember?
Saying?
I can.
Oh, Gillum. Yeah, I remember.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember.
Right.
Cheesemate.
Yeah, go for it.
Everybody tells stories. There's all these rumors, and particularly in the sort of like, you know, Miami machismo like driven culture, a lot of people like to start whispering campaigns about people's, you know, sexuality and their preferences and things. And I don't like that. I mean, it's like I have legit beef, right? I have real policy issues and corruption issues to confront. And that's not, people's personal lives are really, even if you're a public official, I'm not really interested in your private life. And then someone made a point to me once, and I found it really interesting. They said, well, what if a politician, an elected official, has a secret in their personal life that some people know about? And the people who know about it might be lobbyists, they might be developers, they might be powerful or influential people. And they use that secret as leverage to effectively corrupt who might otherwise be a perfectly competent and legitimate and honest politician. And I said, that's a really, really interesting theory, that maybe the personal secret you could affect some kind of influence over that person and effectively corrupt them. In which case, it may be fair game.
Mike, you had something you wanted to get in on Gillum.
Yeah, and DeSantis. It's very obvious, just going off of metrics that chart Fox News Channel appearances. DeSantis is being groomed for a larger office. If DeSantis were actually to stay in Florida and run again, do you think he would win? Because what was the election difference between he and Gillum? Like 33,000?
About between 32 and 33,000, 32,000 and change.
And off the top of your head, how many people have passed away from COVID in the state of Florida that they've reported?
50,000 people have died from COVID in Florida.
Right. Now, the first year, COVID wasn't checking voter ID cards. But after vaccine, predominantly, one can assume in the state of Florida, prominently Republican voters passing away?
Republican voters and Trump voters are more likely to be anti-vax or skeptical of the vaccine, yes.
Okay, so we have enough data that we can assume that if you have a candidate that excites a Democratic base,
Yes.
you could probably make up a very slim margin of victory. Even with DeSantis hanging his hat on all the business he's brought into the state of Florida, and our economy compared to other states wasn't as bad because of my policy, never mind all the death. Do you think DeSantis could win another gubernatorial election?
The Democrats never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Do not overestimate the Democrats. Is all like, especially in Florida.
Well, the support amongst Republican base, even after January 6th, one would assume down here, Cuban conservatives, they've doubled down. They love Ron DeSantis, and still Democrats, granted, we're inching towards an election year. The Democrats still haven't done anything to address that problem. They're putting all their chips with the Puerto Ricans in Central Florida.
The Democrats as a party, have been a non-entity in the state of Florida since about 1999, right about the time, Jeb Bush became the governor. And Nikki Fried's the only Democrat or one of the few Democrats in that entire time, other than Bill Nelson, to win a statewide election in Florida in like the last 20 years. So I don't overestimate the Democrats' ability to fuck up even a gimme election. The problem is that first of all, yes, DeSantis won by the hair of his chinny chin chin. Just barely hit that Trump crest into the governor's mansion. The problem is that he now has the advantage of incumbency, and that that can easily cover the 50,000 voter death spread there. And so, not to mention the publicity. Yeah, he is. But here is the problem that I don't think that Floridians or Republicans in particular care about, is that he's been so busy running for president that he has failed Florida. That's really what's happened. He's already feeding into the worst impulses of the worst people of that base. And with the demagoguery, with the sowing seeds of doubt in institutions, sowing the seeds of doubt in science. So he claimed that we had the most secure election in the history of the state of Florida last year, and then the Republicans immediately dove in to create new voter laws, really just to disenfranchise voters, and they could never answer the question, why do we need these laws if we had the most secure election? And all they say is, well, because we can, because we're Republicans and we run the fucking state. Talk about a mafia.
Another thing that has been happening over the pandemic that has been obvious to all is wealth disparity. And you're of the opinion that if South Florida is above water in a few years, that we're headed toward a place of swamp favelas where people are going to have to live amid abject poverty.
Yeah, we're almost there now. So I would say certainly in our lifetimes we'll see swamp favelas. Miami and Florida in general, the story of Florida real estate, which is the story of Florida, is the story of lies that came true. And so we exist on these boom and bust cycles, and we subsist from hustle to hustle. And what happened in this pandemic is we actually remarkably skipped a bust cycle. I think a lot of indicators were, and real estate people will tell you, that we were heading into a slow downturn pre-pandemic. And we were overdue for it. It was time, we had our boom, and now it was time for our bust. And these bust cycles, they suck, but they're a market correction, right? The cost of living is so out of whack and so out of control, where you have nearly 60% of Miami-Dade County residents who can't afford to make ends meet in Miami-Dade, and those people are employed. Those are not unemployed people. They have at least one job, probably 2, 3, or 4. And so those bus cycles help locals be able to afford to buy a home, be able to afford to just fucking live and exist and raise their children in Miami-Dade County. I don't know what happens when we skip a bust cycle and we go from boom to a bigger boom, which is what happened in this pandemic. Because a lot of people in other places, in dense cities and with even higher or onerous costs of living said, oh, fuck it, I'm going to move to Florida. There's no state income tax, and there's no state income tax, and it's sunny, and there's no state income tax. So, that's why OJ came here. That's why the Enron executives came here. Nobody can take your home in a in a lawsuit. That's why OJ and Enron executives came here. But there's a lot of benefits to that. And so, we created the tech hub scheme, which is just a real estate scheme. It's just the tech hub's like, the tech hustle's like the cocaine boom. It's just another hustle to encourage real estate and to fuel another boom cycle before the next bust. But again, the problem is that all of the worst trends of a boom are now exacerbated and accelerated as a result of the pandemic and skipping a bust. What does that mean? That means more development. That means slashing and burning our natural resources. I don't know how many people can live here when we don't have fucking clean water anymore, or we won't. That means gentrification on steroids. That means in Dade County, we already have one of the largest income gaps and wealth gaps. The separation between the haves and the have-nots is such that, like I said, people can't afford to live in their own community. That's going to get worse, and that's what accelerates this idea that people will be in tent cities on the edge of the Everglades stealing water and electricity. I mean, because what happens is that people who are coming here are not necessarily coming here well, first of all, they're making the prices outrageous. They're driving the prices up in such a way that the people who will have to serve in the service industry, in the service jobs, those people are not going to be able to afford to live here to do that. And we have no efficient public transit because we don't prioritize that. We are slashing and burning the Everglades. The Miami-Dade County Commission just voted once again, not the final vote, but voted to expand and extend the urban development boundary, which is the UDB is exactly what it sounds like, which is like, okay, at some point we have to stop building strip malls and condos and shit and have to let our Everglades and our water supply and our natural ecosystem exist, if not thrive. We have to let Biscayne Bay survive. The water and the beaches are supposed to be our bread and butter, and you have fish kills, for fuck's sake. Piles of dead fish and dead manatees and dead dolphin and construction debris running off. And some of those construction sites are run by the state of Florida, and they don't give a fuck. They just don't give a fuck. It's construction dysfunction, and I should say it's corruption dysfunction and nonstop construction. That's like, what do they say? What's the old joke? The state bird of Florida is the construction crane. And that's really the truth, because you have politicians with warped priorities and perverse incentives. They measure progress by the number of construction cranes that they can count on the horizon and the amount of public money that they can dole out in corporate welfare to millionaire and billionaire developers and sports team owners. I had to mention that.
Gambling coming to Florida as well for those sports team owners. Do you have any concerns there that our most corrupt of states and our most corrupt of cities is now welcoming in and cleaning up the gambling money?
Fuck no. That's like the least of our problems, number one. I'm more concerned that we're like that the money laundering capital of the Americas, Miami, is now like a Bitcoin hub. I don't even really understand why a decentralized currency needs a hub. I thought that was the whole point of it. And this is the worst possible place, obviously, to mine for Bitcoin, just ecologically speaking. I guess they could use Turkey Point until that melts down, turns the fucking iguanas into Godzilla. But I think that it's such a joke, dude. First of all, my grandfather was a developer post-war in Miami Beach. He built dozens of hotels and apartment buildings. In the 50s, every single hotel in Miami Beach had a bookie, a house bookie. Every single hotel, gambling was going on. For fuck's sake, Goldfinger was playing poker in the back of the Fontainebleau in the beginning of the James Bond movie. This has always been a gambling mecca. Every time they have there's always a debate. Are we going to legalize gambling in the state of Florida? Has anyone been on the Florida Turnpike or I-95? Every other billboard is for a casino. What are we talking about? Gambling, legalizing? It's already fucking here. Of course we should have those opportunities should exist. We should create those kinds of jobs and we should have sports betting. Here's the fucked up thing. Over the last year, 2 years of this pandemic now, the Florida legislature, who only meets once a year during what they call the session, which is in the spring, called no special meetings. They didn't have a special meeting about COVID. They didn't have a special meeting about our unemployment website that we spent $100 million in counting of public money on and has never worked. Even Ron DeSantis said that Rick Scott designed it to fail, to discourage people from being able to seek unemployment. And then, of course, the rush of unemployment happened during the pandemic and it melted down. They did not have a special session about that. They did not have a special session about any of these important issues that were killing Floridians every day. They had a special session for sports gambling. They called all of our representatives and state senators back from their districts. They all had to get on planes to Tallahassee and go up there to have a special session in the middle of a fucking pandemic about sports gambling, which should absolutely be legal. There's no, and again, feels like it's already been legal all this time. But like, I mean, it's Bolita, I guess. but like, that's the priorities. That's the only thing that really upsets me about it is that those are our priorities.
Money. That brings up a lot of money. And you would think that this would be really good for partners like ours, like DraftKings. But the Seminole Tribe of Florida is really what made this thing happen, and they're going to have exclusivity for the uninitiated. Can you explain exactly how much power they have in the state and how they're able to wield a power like exclusivity and a monopoly over it, presumably here for a little bit? It's definitely going to be tied up in litigation.
Never surrender. I love the Seminole Tribe. They're so badass. They're so badass. Years ago, I think it was with Governor Charlie Crist. They basically, every time they're up for renegotiation on some sort of, gambling pact with the Florida legislature. They're so cool. They're so badass. Like they they made some deal with the governor at the time, with Charlie Crist. And they had this exchange, like, we're going to give the state X number of hundreds of millions of dollars. We're going to get certain rights to a particular class of gaming. We're going to allow limited blackjack and to expand our games. And the legislature is like, oh, fuck you. You have no authority as the governor to do that. So we're going to sue you and stop you because we're the legislature. This has to go through us. We need to vote on it. And they stopped them. They stopped the governor. And so what the Seminoles said was like, oh, it's all good. We're just going to put this money, this like hundreds of millions of dollars, in a little lockbox, in a little fund, a little glass booth that's, in case of emergency break. And we're just going to let you kind of press your nose up against the glass and kind of taunt you with it. And whenever you guys are ready to come to the table, we'll just have that money sitting there and waiting on you. And you better believe with the quickness, they found their way back to the tribe and said, let's make a deal, baby. I mean, they have a lot of sway in this state, as they should. It actually belonged to them is the thing.
Billy, thank you. Look forward to doing more of this, sir. Always illuminating.
Do you?
I do. I enjoy it. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't enjoy it. My whole life right now is about only do things that I enjoy. I want people to hear from you on this stuff, and I think it's important that they hear from you on this stuff.
Go Canes.